The crimes of ritual sexual abuse, ritual sexual abuse.
It was high-profile men coming to King's Cross and buying children. It was like going to a coffee shop and buying a cup of coffee, you know, they'd just come down and be able to purchase a kid.
About Porky's nightclub, what was it?
It was a strip club.
Yep.
Where women and men would go there, enjoy themselves, but downstairs in the underground areas, there was a place where they called the kids nightclub, where if you had money, you could pay for a child for the night.
Tell us about that. How many times were you taken there, or from what years?
I was taken there. I was taken there. I would say this. I was taken there from the age of 5 right till I was 14.
The Ted Heath thing as well, the former Prime Minister. How did that story come about?
And we went sailing. There was 4 of us. Me, Ted Heath, I didn't know who he was, the doctor from the school, and the fucking deputy headmaster. And I was told to go nude swimming, which I did. Ted Heath dried me. Give me a blowjob, played me with Willie, had me do kissing. Well, he was kissing more than blowing, to be quite honest with you. And got me to do the same to him.
That were involved in all this rubbish.
You got Bob Hawke, Murdoch, Justice Woods, Justice Collins, Phil, Packer, King, and you know, the big one is Kidman. Kidman was the worst out of them all. Nicole Kidman's father was one out of them all. Believe me, I tell you that.
We went out onto a road where there was fields, and they raped me there. They were hitting me and beating me so bad.
Of course, he claimed that he didn't. I had his polygraph, which he passed, which forever destroyed my faith in polygraphs.
But there's another area of Father George Bush, which is something that a lot of conspiracy research doesn't cover, but really needs to, and that is pedophilia. It's a deep rabbit hole, but when you connect the dots, you can explain why the ratio of pedophiles to positions of power, especially in the higher levels, is fantastic compared with the ratio of pedophiles in the general population.
Graham Kennedy was always the sort of man who nurtured young talent. He enjoyed giving young people a chance on television. He was a great mentor. He mentored a lot of young people. You knew that if you went to his dressing room and it was locked, he'd be inside doing some mentoring.
Yeah, it's great because when you say one of the ex governors, the commissioner of the correct services is a pedophile, they don't really like you to talk about something like that.
And that's Ron Woodham, yeah?
Yeah, it's correct.
So you're saying that Ron Woodham, who was the Commissioner of Corrective Services in New South Wales,
yep,
was a pedophile?
That's correct.
Brian Houston is still under police investigation over allegations he didn't report alleged child abuse involving his father. So the question's always been, why would you invite someone who was the subject of such serious allegations being investigated by police to the White House, a mate of yours, effectively?
Pastor Terry is very close with Brian Houston, the Hillsong church founder, who infamously attempted to cover up his father's pedophilia. Brian Houston, on his father, who was never charged, said, quote, "I have no doubt now that my father was a serial pedophile and will probably never know the extent of it." That's from him.
Or do you want to breathe free from pain relief? Do you want to see?
I've got the book, Little Tim, Big Tim. That is, evidential reference, I feel. No problems there. I've got the statement from the police. They actually believe me. Like, I was bounced from the Royal Commission to the police. Spent 4 days over 2 years telling the story about VIPs.
This guy's been responsible for the deaths of goodness knows how many children. And I've met some of the adults that he abused as children and survived. And they are absolutely scrambled, mentally, emotionally, and physically, because of the horrors that this man put them through. You'll find out their greatest fear, and you'll make them experience it over and over again to break them mentally and emotionally. And you will do that over and over and over again. That's Father George Bush, and he's just one of them. You would pepper bomb Baghdad and have no emotional consequences. You would do 9/11, have no emotional consequences. You would put a virus out there to kill large numbers of people, no emotional consequences. You would put stuff in vaccines designed to affect people mentally, emotionally, and physically. You would have a eugenics operation. You would plan and scheme to dramatically reduce the population, and you would have no empathy with the consequences of your actions that others would feel. That's the mentality, Luke, that we're dealing with. And because they're not like the general human population. They don't see the world and they don't see life in the same way. And that's the force we're dealing with. And we need to get streetwise to that, and then we'll have a chance of dealing with it. Because why we say, they'd never do that. No, you'd never do that. They do it every day.
This morning, and Candace, this is linking into this whole like Satanism and pedophilia, and what Candace is like, she's called it this Operation Mocking Pastor. So people that would know, they've been listening to her. She's been like giving like a full history of military intelligence infiltration into like obviously like world events, and it starts like with the Charlie Kirk thing, but the military's infiltration to all these different aspects. And I was actually like, I was listening to Billy Corgan as well today, and Billy Corgan was talking about how they got rid of rock music. And he says about 1997, which is interesting because it's the same year that Mark Devlin speaks of in his book, when they really changed music. And this was coinciding at the time when Tony Blair came in, and they called it New Labour. And to mark New Labour, they brought in the Spice Girls. So this is when bubblegum pop came in, the Spice Girls, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, all around 1997, right? But he said they clearly made a decision within music production and the big Sony and these big companies to go away from rock music. And he basically says in here that they wanted to get rid of rock voices. And that's when it came in, and this was a whole new Labour era that was marked then, actually, and it was used with Oasis, which was kind of the end of that British rock music of the late 90s. And we saw like a lot of anti-establishment music that prior to that, even with like grunge music, and then and the counterculture that came out of the 60s, but that was all Laurel Canyon military intelligence, CIA as well too. And they've always steered these cultures with a different drug. And then he speaks about how it went into like rap music, and rap music was obviously associated with like the prison industrial complex, with gangster rap in the 80s and 90s, where they said, you know, we're going to make you calling yourself nigger very popular. which was like stated in one of these meetings. And Professor Griff talks about that, how they originally Public Enemy came out as this group that was very anti-establishment with songs like Fight the Power and all these kind of things, and then they started steering it into this other direction of like of crime and all these kind of things. So my point is that they steered culture through military intelligence. Candace is like showing a lot of this, especially how they're doing it through the churches, and also with music now too. You can see the flip that's occurring too, that it's going back to the right wing and the conservatives, and and they're starting to bring rock and stuff back, because the modern day rap music and this mumble rap and shit like that is actually associated with prescription drugs. And anyway, what they do, you know, like that song, like anyway, well, I'll get past that, it's beyond the point. But now it's going towards country music. But what Candace is showing this, how they've done this culture creation, and what they did what they did through Operation Mocking Pastor, like just like Mockingbird with the media, but like the military intelligence infiltration into the big churches. So in the episode this week, she brought up how Erica went missing in 2008, and Erica said they found like tweets from that time, and she was spending her entire time doing biblical studies. And what Candace has put forward as her hypothesis at the moment, without a great deal of evidence, but if you've watched Candace's show, you'll see that she actually builds on a story, and she's actually holding out 8 episodes later for what she's actually going to introduce, but she already has the information. So I'd say it's not a hypothesis, I would say this is true, that Erica went away for training to become a born-again Christian, in which she was then going to target Charlie Kirk and be an infiltrator into that, to eventually steer to steer him through the what do they call it, the Christian Zionists within America, and to use Charlie to do basically what he did, and especially like that connection to you know, with all the Israel donations. And she shows this with like Mikey McCoy and these pastors, that they set up this thing called Turning Point Faith, and this was a big part of the production. But it was the whole Turning Point USA was a military program. Anyway, you've got to watch Candace's show. But the thing she points to was the lady that was her mentor through this period. I can't remember her name. I'll try and find it. Her last name's Chris, but the pastor husband is one of Brian Houston's best friends. And he's going to tie into what I'm doing later, because I'm going to show a little bit of the satanic network in Australia and these pedophile rings.
Could be the City of Grace, which is in Scottsdale, City of Grace of Scottsdale. Pastor Terry Christ is mentioned on her X feed as early as 2011. She says, Pastor Terry is awesome. We got some more tweets here. I cherish your friendship and I'm grateful for your love. Judith Christ, that would be his wife. You are the epitome of a Proverbs. I am totally obsessed with City of Grace, she says. Sunday mornings with my Tyler Massey. Oh, no, you guys know Tyler Massey. She didn't date anybody before. Charlie, oh no, you guys are messing up. My heart is overwhelmed with incredible amounts of joy. Congratulations, Terry Christ, Judith Christ. The vibes are vibing. Now, coincidentally, and I'm going to bring Ashley on in a second to explain a little more, but I'll tell you that Pastor Terry is very close with Brian Houston, the Hillsong church founder who infamously attempted to cover up his father's pedophilia. Brian Houston, on his father, who was never charged, said, quote, I have no doubt now that my father was a serial pedophile and will probably never know the extent of it. That's from him. That's a quote from him. She has been friends since 1994. So Eric has been friends with them. So let me bring on Ashley to explain that, the Terry, Christ, and Judith and the relation in a better manner, because she's way deeper down that rabbit hole than I am.
Yeah, so like we said, Pastor Terry Christ and his wife, Pastor Judith Christ, they were very close with Erica at this time. From 2011 to around 2016 is where we can track their relationship. And interestingly, Pastor Terry Christ has a very interesting background. So he is very good friends with Brian Houston, who was the founder of Hillsong. And like you said, he was very much he covered up his father's pedophilia for years, and he actually never got charged for it. And so Brian Houston resigned eventually, and then right afterwards, Pastor Terry Christ also resigned from his church that he was leading, but he said it wasn't related. So nothing to see there. And then one other weird thing that happened was Pastor Terry Christ and his wife were accused of having, well, this is just word on the street, but they would have their congregants like throw up into bags to get rid of big bad spirits. And so that's just word on the street, allegedly.
Allegedly, I will say that even regarding the pastor, even though his son is making the allegation that he believes his father was a pedophile, if he was not charged, then we cannot state that definitively. But, you know, there seems to be some smoke there. That is what has been alleged, even by his own son.
Brian Houston, who was like best friends with Scott Morrison, and the one that was kicked out by President Trump, who was Scott Morrison's guest at a White House dinner, was told to piss off by Trump, reportedly. And this was because, you know, Brian was obviously covering up for his father, Frank Houston, that was well in the media, but I think Brian's a little bit more deeper than just covering up for his father.
Brian Houston of Hillsong his name was put forward to the White House for that visit.
Absolutely did on the Ben Fordham show on 2GB, Kieran, and I guess this is important, or it's interesting, because Brian Houston is still under police investigation over allegations he didn't report alleged child abuse involving his father. So the question's always been, why would you invite someone who was the subject of such serious allegations being investigated by police to the White House?
Being the head of Hillsong, Hillsong is the exact same operation as these mega churches in America. And those who know, if you listen to an old Fiona Barnett interview, she has this one where this lady, Deb, comes on twice, and it was called Christian Life Centre at that point. So the church was Christian Life Centre, came from New Zealand, and Frank Houston was basically pissed off from New Zealand because he was a pedophile, and he was funded through Macquarie Investment, and they were caught into like different things like the bottom of the harbour scheme and stuff like that, and money laundering. And this is the same thing that we saw with the Franklin Credit Union, that all this money was being filtered, and then it goes through, like, even Candace is showing it, how it goes through all these LLCs and stuff like that, how they launder the money. And Hillsong, I think, owns Gloria Jean's Coffee, but they were laundering. They basically financially aided and set up, and this is what you talk about, like different seed funded companies, like that Playboy was seed funded by the CIA, and the CIA was using Playboy planes for black ops and all sorts of things. And the same thing was the case with Hillsong, and were funded through Macquarie Investment, who Malcolm Turnbull was working for Macquarie Bank at the time too. And people know about Malcolm Turnbull. He was the one that cleaned up after when the Soviet Union fell, and he went and bought up all these Soviet minerals for like pennies on the dollar when they left all their mines and stuff vacant when the Soviet Union collapsed, and he was caught into like the Panama Papers. And we know that like Malcolm Turnbull became Kerry Packer's lawyer, and that he actually bought the rights for Playboy to come over to Australia. So like he was a big hitter. He was basically a billionaire before he became Prime Minister. But that Candace has showed here the ties to which she's basically proven is a military operation with these mega churches in America, and then showing, of course, Hillsong in Australia. And Hillsong, I've got whole other videos going back 4 years ago. I've done a whole one about Hillsong, and yeah, there was accusations of ritual abuse, of child trafficking going on within the church, and even like secret doors and stuff set up by they showed ties with like the original architect of Hillsong Church. And obviously like Hillsong was connected to, they basically run mind control operation. They had like a lot of celebrities on board, like Justin Bieber and all that. But this is obviously it's a big story, and the global pedo empire that we're seeing now too, its ties are going to like, the tentacle's going to go into Australia so bad too. And if you look at like a lot of what is eventually going to come out, where I think with like the Steele dossier and stuff like this was coming out of America to try and get Trump, you're going to see the biggest links are with the Commonwealth countries. And I think what we're going to see in the coming years, that the Commonwealth countries, and particularly Australia, is these are the dirtiest, these are the pedo havens. So I'll put it here later in the video too. There was a appendix in a David Icke book called Confessions of a Satanist, and he names Australia as the capital of worldwide Satanism. And the other one, I think I skipped it in this story, but it's also important because this has been coming out it came out the other day that Prince Andrew is like an avid gamer. Elon Musk is a gamer, like a known gamer, right? And I think that this gives hints that he's actually a military, like an intelligence asset. I don't necessarily think Elon's bad, but the fact that he's on these games all the time says that he's an asset. And I heard this in a talk the other week, and he was talking about during Benghazi, that the second to the ambassador in Benghazi was also a massive gamer. Then there was another one with that Stephen Paddock, who was you're like, why am I talking about gaming? But I'll get there. The Stephen Paddock, who was the so-called Las Vegas shooter, who was actually working as a double agent. He was like a guns runner and all this. They went in, eventually raided his house after it, and his brother got done for child porn on his computer. And this came out with, what I'm going to here was, this was an old, from the Q board, I think it might have been in 2020, and they put forward that Obama was called Severus on this game, and the game was like, it was a shitty Star Wars game that no one plays. But what they were hinting to in the Q post is that they use the back channels and the chat rooms of some of these online games to go in and have secret military conversations, because it's completely, it's secure. It's a place that no one would expect that they would go. And this is also why they say they didn't want Elon to buy Twitter, because they were using like direct messages in Twitter and these group chats in Twitter, because they felt completely safe in there. A lot of high-level government and military operations were being done through Twitter chat rooms. And you think, like, why would you put it on Twitter? It's not a secured thing. It's because the service in Twitter itself is a military operation. It's all of that technology came out of DARPA, and this is why they desperately didn't want it to get into the hands of Elon. But where I'm going with this is what they would do, what this guy stated was, the military, and I think he names one in Maryland, one of the main bases, the military run all the child pornography servers. So this is when you get onto the dark web and deep web. It's been funded by these servers on these military bases, and of course they use these child porn sites for many different reasons. And a large part of that is funding the black market and black ops operations, because you've got to get money through illegal means to fund things that are off the government budget. So, and there's many other reasons, but one of them, what they actually do on these websites is they would go in and have secret military chats within the child porn websites, because they're running the entire thing. And the thing is that by the time, if you do that, if you've got someone that's working within your operation and they start to pull out, or they want to turn away or whatever, or they want to rat on someone or whatever it might be, that's how you get them. You say that they were on a child porn website. And apparently this was the case with Stephen Paddock's brother, because he was a military intelligence. Now, how many times have you seen in the last few years of certain people getting done with child porn on their computers? And how many of these are actually like maybe even possibly good people or rogue people that have been done, or they're involved in espionage or whatever it might be? They're working as a double agent and they get done for this kind of stuff, right? Because when you're an asset, you could have a cover as anything. You could be a school teacher, you could be a priest, you could be whatever. You could have any sort of cover in normal society, and no one knows that you're actually a military asset. So, but the reason I bring this one up is because of the Peter Scully case. And I did a lot of research into this one years ago, because anyway, it's a whole long story. But this was one of the sickest kind of child porn sites that has been at least exposed when it came out. And it was one of the sites was called Hurt to the Core, and people were paying tens of thousands of dollars to dictate the types of abuse that these children would go through. And in this case, there was a video streamed online. It was called Daisy's Destruction, and but I won't go into details, but the kids were brutally abused and then murdered online in the live stream video. So Peter Scully ended up getting caught for this, and you can watch a really psychotic interview with him on 60 Minutes where you can see looking straight into the eyes of a psychopath. It's quite scary.
That's a very good question. At what point do you feel remorse? I think there's different degrees of remorse all the way through, right? But I think your greatest remorse comes when you finally realise the extent of what you've done.
And at what point was that?
At what point was that? I can't answer that honestly.
Why isn't it the point where you're actually raping somebody and violently torturing them? Why isn't it at the point when you kill a child? Why isn't it then? Why don't you realise the extent of what you've done at that point?
Maybe you should ask a psychiatrist.
I'm asking the man who did it.
Yeah.
But where the story gets interesting was Scully was the one who was filming this child rape material, and then who was distributing it was a guy called Lux. I think his name's Matthew. I can't remember now, but he was like a 21-year-old. At least they've pinned it on this guy, right? Because they found out that the servers in which these CP was being done in Melbourne. Now, I don't believe the story that it was being done, because it's always like it's the kid in the basement. This kid in the basement was literally running a child porn empire through his servers in Melbourne. But I think that's where the cover up of the story was. I think the servers absolutely were in Melbourne. But if you look at too, especially the number of different startups and tech firms and security agencies, they call Melbourne the tech hub of the Asia Pacific and the cyber hub of the Asia Pacific region. So I would say those servers were there, and it could be anywhere from CERN, the synchrotron, or any other different military facilities within Melbourne. I think they pinned it on this guy, Lux. So anyway, it's I just wanted to add that before I show the rest of the video. And also we'll have a number of different podcasts. We've got a few in the bank now, and we're going to try and put these out on a weekly basis. We just had a chat with Clint Walker, tribal man over in WA, which is excellent. We did two long chats with him today. So what we'll be doing is we'll be putting one of them up public, and the other part where we get a little bit more intimate into the private space on our Substack. On our Patreon. So I'll leave the link under here below if people want to join that too. And if you just want to listen to the public one, it'll be on Spotify. All right, I'll leave it at that, and I'll play the rest of the video.
G'day. So I just wanted to do, obviously the Epstein thing's been quite big, and we're seeing a lot come out. We've still got the release of the next 3 million files after this one, and I think this kind of acts as a pivotal marker, because what this is, and I think there's a lot of subterfuge, and there's a lot of deception and stuff, and a lot of false information that's going to be coming out of these files and accusations. We know that even like with the links with Soros foundations and stuff that are actually propping up some of these victims that we've seen of late, and not from the early victims, people like Maria Farmer and even Virginia Giuffre. But look, for those of us that have, this has been a reality of the world for many years. It's been a tough ride to try and talk about this thing, and for a large part of time, I would post stuff on Facebook, and I'm talking like going back decades ago, and I'd talk to friends, anyone that would wanted to listen, but it was shut down, and you were laughed at. We all know that kind of story. But we've reached a point now where this is actually a marker of, I would say, that a huge shift in human consciousness. And when we're talking about like shifts in consciousness, it's not like, I'm not thinking like in the New Age sense, but it is that as well. But what is consciousness? It's like to become consciously aware, to actually be aware of a new reality. And for a large part of the population that has been in amnesia and ignorance and naivety about the way that the world works, this is huge. So we can't underestimate, for those of us that have been aware of this information in detail for many years, that we can't underestimate how big this is for the public consciousness. Now, I know, like, I've had family and friends and that completely would reject all this kind of stuff now that are looking into it, and this is a part of their reality. So it tells me we've had a shift in consciousness. So what it is, it's almost like the process of what I said that I went down many years ago, that the first thing that I kind of went into and was kind of struck by and wanted to know more about was the subject of evil and what evil really is. So this is the path early for these people in understanding what evil is, and we know like the polarity of what that actually brings to. And I think even for certain aspects and groups that are leading disclosure at the moment, that this is actually their motivation, and this is going to tie into the UFOs and UAPs, and this is why we've been hearing for the last several years that they're introducing this understanding that there is a spiritual element to these UFOs, right? And now I've just been listening to Candace Owens' podcast too, and this is kind of exactly the path that she's kind of going down, looking at Looking Glass and stuff like that. And actually, like, for people that should really watch her, I'm going to get into this in a minute, but like, people should really watch her just because I see very much that she's actually part of the same disclosure op as other groups, and certain groups that she is, even on the surface level, but is against on the surface level, and she's exposing a different part of it. And if you've seen like what she's putting out at the moment, it's like she's giving like a brief history of military intelligence and operations and what Joseph Atwell called lifetime actors. And going into MK Ultra, and it's absolutely fascinating in the way that it's scripted and being put in place. And there's no way she's putting that together. But anyway, I just wanted to really go over to some of the real base topics of what we know about Satanism and ritual abuse, and especially these pedophile rings, because this has become a big topic now. Those that have listened to me for a long time will know this was kind of the first subject that I was speaking about when I first did my YouTube channel. This was, become the basis of what I was talking about, and I kind of became known as the person that spoke about that, which I kind of didn't like, but it is core. And if you go, like, my introduction to this really was through David Icke, and he deserves a lot of credit for especially the early years where this information was not easy to put in the public sphere, especially to publish into public available information back then. And he copped shit. He was an early person that broke through with this information and kind of put it forward to a bigger audience. And what he always said was Satanism, pedophilia, and secret societies is this glue that molds this entire system together. And there's no going back from where we are at the moment. So once this is consciously aware, this tells me again, consciousness is rising. We're going to see a rise in technology. And we're seeing all these themes of AI and stuff now coming in, even with in the case of the Epstein files, they're saying to look out for deep fakes. And that's a whole other thing that me and Madeline spoke about on the podcast the other day. What I do want to say too is that we, with the podcast going forward, Madeline and myself will attempt to try and have a guest on every week, as well as do our individual shows. And we'll probably publish like half of the episode on the public platform, and then we're going to do the rest on Patreon. And on Patreon, we're going to also do live calls with guests and ourselves that people can come on and ask questions and share and make it a bit of a community, kind of like we did with the conference. So if anyone wants to join that going forward, it's $22 a month for anyone that wants to jump in. People go, "No, you're a grifter." Well, whatever. That's what we're doing. And actually, there's quite a lot of work that goes into actually doing these podcasts and then editing and putting our time and energy into it. So like we think it's a good valued space, and it's something that we want to maintain with like a long-term consistency as a group. So yeah, anyway, we're looking forward to getting that going. So look, I'll leave a link under here if anyone wants to join. But if not, that's cool, and we'll publish the rest of it onto Spotify in the public forum. So anyway, what I want to do is I want to share some of these links, and I did a show with Adrian the other day, and I was actually going to share them on there, and we kind of really didn't get into it. But like I'll tell you like the early introduction for this, and this is why I said like David Icke's books are so good, because he references so many other things, because none of his information, he says that his information, and I want to be people go, "Oh, you David Icke sycophant, shut the fuck up," right? Like that was like the introduction of me into this kind of stuff, particularly around like 9/11. And then, this was like probably the mid 2000s when I started getting really deep into this. And it was him, it was Jordan Maxwell, it was Michael Tazarian, and it was Coast to Coast AM with like George Norrie and Art Bell and that kind of stuff. And I was just eating that up, but no one gave the references in the way that he did. And David always says that his information always comes to him intuitively first. And he's become very aware of how to spot this over time. And then what happens is, people, information, documents, guests, whatever, they all start merging in the same theme of what this was. And when he wrote The Biggest Secret, which came out in 1997, but he did all the research from like 95, 96 with like Craig Miltler and Cathy O'Brien and Sandra Fecht over in Canada and all these different people. It was all leading him to this theme of a non-human intervention into humanity that was steering it down a certain path. And this was where the force was being driven from. But then it was also going into like MK Ultra military programs. And this is what Candace is unbelievable at the moment. She's putting forward, and with like new information with people like Erica and these mega churches and stuff, and how these were all part of like culture creation through the intelligence agencies and military intelligence. So this is kind of all the stuff, and then obviously it introduced this was a reptilian theme, and about the bloodlines and about the Diana assassination. So this was all the kind of stuff that I was really into around that time. But he led me on to actually many other books. That's what I was going to get to, and one of them was like Bloodlines of the Illuminati by Fritz Springmeier. And I think I don't even think you can get this book anymore. It's not published anymore. And I actually found out of that through David Icke and then Professor Griff, who used to be in Public Enemy. And he was big on the scene back then in the early 2000s. He was actually kicked out of Public Enemy due to his anti-Semitic stance back in the 90s. That's how long this shit's been going on. And he had his house burned down and all sorts of stuff. And he's wrote a few books, Professor Griff. He's very good. But Fritz Springmeier, he wrote that, Bloodlines of the Illuminati. And then he wrote another one, How to Detect an I can never get the theme right. How to Detect an undetectable mind-controlled slave, or whatever it was. And he actually goes through, and people that don't know Fritz Springmeier, he was one of the very earliest on the scene with uncovering MK Ultra and how they were using mind control on the population, but then also the individual programs that we used, and actually the methods that we used in how to honeycomb the brain into dissociation through this MK Ultra trauma-based mind control. And he got it down to the very science. And Fritz Springmeier ended up going to jail for a long time, 10, 15 years. I think he only came out a few years ago. So there was a lot of Fritz Springmeier stuff as well in David Icke's books back then. It was really good. So anyway, I just want to take you through a few of these different themes. Now, the one I really love is, I shouldn't say love, but the story that puts a lot of sense for me was, in particular, the Raina Michelson testimony. Now, I wasn't aware of this one at the time until I read Fiona Barnett's book, Eyes Wide Open, and I must have read that. I think she put that out about a year after she made her public statement in 2015 in front of the mainstream media, saying that she was raped and abused by a former prime minister, and this actually was big in the mainstream news at the time. And then she published this book. She started doing a series of videos with Steve McMurray, who's an investigative researcher in Australia. And I don't know what happened to him after, but he published a lot of different articles, especially like connections with MK Ultra in America into Australia with people like Anthony Kidman. So anyway, she brought out that book in 2016, and she publishes the entire Raina Michelson testimony, right? So this is a woman who was Young Victorian of the Year, who actually now had to flee Victoria, and she goes through the entire story. And the best thing about this is you have a legitimate person who uncovered a massive child abuse ring involving network TV, politicians, charities, police, all these different people, and being covered up by people like the education department, even the ombudsman, who was like having to investigate the case of the corrupt police. Was like, the whole thing was it just showed the entire part of this, how big this web was. But the reason this one was so good, because you actually have mainstream media articles that show you when this was going place, in particular the investigation by the ombudsman into police corruption around this story. So I'm going to try and share some of these. Oh, hang on. How do I get? I need like a better view. Here we go. What? Oh, here we go. Okay. I'll try and there we go. Hope people can see that. If not, I'll just edit them in. So this was just the one because, like, Hillary Clinton, they're apparently having to do a disposition in front of Congress at the moment, and she's being called again. And like the arrogance of Hillary Clinton to like think that they're even going to possibly get away with this now. And she's saying like they didn't know Epstein and that. Even Maria Farmer was saying like Clintons were regulars on the ranch in which the ranch was in New Mexico, the one that's actually just been sold off. This ranch, that they were regulars there. But look, the history of the Clintons is unbelievable and extensive, and I won't go into it. But this was just one. I don't know if people remember this, and this kind of started resurfacing a lot around 2016. And this was when she was a lawyer and was representing a man who had raped a child, and she was caught on video. And you can find this video online. I might even play it.
Put me in the truck, and they were hitting me, and I was screaming and crying.
This guy was accused of raping a 12-year-old who was the daughter of a family he was living in Springmeier.
We went out onto a road where there was fields, and they raped me there. They were hitting me and beating me so bad.
Of course, he claimed that he didn't. I had his polygraph, which he passed, which forever destroyed my faith in polygraphs.
In her eagerness to defend the guilty rapist, Hillary Clinton traveled 1,200 miles to New York City to obtain the assistance of a famous blood evidence expert.
I had stitches around my private part, and I was told at that point by the doctor that it was a 99% chance that I could probably never have kids.
Upon returning to Arkansas, Clinton lied to the judge, claiming that the expert was prepared to come from New York to Arkansas to defend the rapist. But in fact, the expert had told Clinton that he could not assist at all.
Well, this guy's ready to come from New York to get this miscarriage of justice.
But the real injustice was that her guilty client ended up serving only 1 year in jail thanks to her bluffing,
in which she was laughing about how she got this guy off. Where do I go back? They'll start. Okay, so this could be a bit out of order. Actually, I'll go to the David Icke book. That's one at the start. So if people haven't read that, it's one of the greatest books, and it's still very timely now to 1997, especially what he gets into around Ted Heath. He speaks about Ted Heath, the former British Prime Minister, who David Icke was accusing at the time, along with other people like Lord McAlpine and what's his name? His name now. Leon Britton. Leon Britton, who I think was the Home Secretary at the time. You know, big names in British politics. And he says that the Margaret Thatcher administration was basically infested with pedophiles. Now, he was calling this out in 1997, and this started surfacing again around after the Jimmy Savile revelations and what they called the Dickens dossier. So a man called Geoffrey Dickens, who was an MP at the time, was given this dossier of a list of pedophiles within the Thatcher government, and then apparently nothing ever happened to this document. And this actually ties in people like Peter Mandelson now, who's come out that he had dealings with Jeffrey Epstein, and now Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, knew about it. And Mandelson was actually in charge of, was connected in with when David Cameron had to called for an inquiry, and David Cameron had to set up an independent inquiry, a little bit like what we would call a royal commission here, to look into this Dickens dossier that had named all these pedophiles. So what's happening now with Jeffrey Epstein? This is nothing new. This was out ages ago, right? And it's coming out in the mainstream media that the Met Police in London said if Ted Heath was still alive, he would be charged and arrested. Former British Prime Minister, and was a Satanist and a very good friend of Jimmy Savile as well. So anyway, the Johnny Gosch story, I'm going to go back to that one. McMartin Preschool. Now, this was mentioned in that book too. Now, this was a child daycare centre in which some of the kids were coming forward with stories of ritual abuse and tunnel systems under the preschool. Now, this was such a big case at the time that this was the most expensive court case in American history. I think at the time, up until it might have got taken by the O.J. Simpson case, but this was the biggest case at the time. They did excavation after it, and they found like satanic relics and all these different things. Became a massive cover-up. There's what I actually mentioned on the podcast the other day about they're talking about AI and fabrication of these images, and I really do think that something like this is going to take place, that we're going to see something on Donald Trump come out with like an image. And I know Madeline even sent me one the other day of Pauline Hanson. She goes, Pauline's been hit in Parliament House or whatever. And it was this fake AI image. So they're kind of like rubbing this out there or getting people used to the idea that we can't trust our eyes anymore. If it's an image, we can't trust our eyes. So I think I can see something where Trump will be seen in an image, the media will go absolutely ballistic, and this will actually be used as a tactic by other people in which images or emails will come out later that they'll use that. So I think that's important. Do we remember this? Jimmy Savile could have been part of a satanic abuse ring, according to reports. These are mainstream articles, and they were talking about him having sex with dead bodies in the mortuary, and that's why he had access to all these hospitals and leads and stuff like that. And now you've got to remember too that this came out in documents that the police and that knew, which means the royal family had to know because they've got like all their special branch and stuff that has to go through the administration before you get checked before you can even meet any of these royals. And Savile was deeply connected in with the royals, and he was actually introduced into the royal family by Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was what's his name, Prince Philip's father, and he ended up, Lord Louis Mountbatten was actually killed by the IRA, and they apparently had children on his boats, and he was a known pedophile. He's been listed many times, right? So he was introduced into the royal family by Lord Louis Mountbatten. That's what's his name, Lord McAlpine. That is what's his name again, Leon Britton. Now this actually came out in an Australian 60 Minutes documentary, not documentary, but they did an episode in 60 Minutes, and what I think it was one of the consulates in Australia, their kid ended up going missing, and this became a big case, and this became known as the Westminster pedophile ring that almost broke out. Well, it did break out into the mainstream media to a degree around 2015, 2016. And a lot of the abuse was happening in a place called Dolphin Square. And there's many kids that have spoken out about this, and that's where this Australian person's child was going to, and Leon Britton was said to be.
Britain's biggest ever scandal is about to explode.
I just said to him that I think he's been taken by someone high up.
And what did that senior policeman say to you?
He said to me, you keep saying things like that, you could get hurt.
On 60 Minutes, a special investigation.
Cabinet ministers, lords, spies, even senior police.
Into a terrible cover-up.
We think then I was about 8.
That goes all the way to the top.
Were you stopped from arresting him?
Yes.
What were you told?
That the decision had been made higher up the chain.
For the first time, exposing the dark secrets.
Why didn't somebody just step in?
Of Britain's most powerful men.
You believe still that the majority of children at the age of 10 can communicate their consent to a sexual act?
Yes, I do, yes.
I felt afraid to say no.
But if they were traumatised, they wouldn't have gone along.
You see, that's another lie that pedophiles spin. Believe me, they are traumatised.
And how the chauffeur to Australia's High Commissioner,
this is where we lived,
holds the key.
Has his body ever been found?
No. I smell rats of the highest order.
This is the story.
I think the genie is out of the bottle.
That will rock.
I don't think we should talk in this emotive fashion.
The British establishment.
You don't forget those faces. No way.
But this was like another guy, Michael Tarragett. He was abused by, what's his name, Ted Heath, the former British Prime Minister. And they used to go on his boat. I think it was at the Morning Glory or the Morning Cloud. He used to go on there with Jimmy Savile. And they said that Heath had like this weird way of abusing kids. He had like some metal hand or something like that. And they would do this a lot of the times. They would do intentional things like this. They said like even Pierre Trudeau would abuse kids in helicopters. And this is actually mentioned in the Raina Michelson testimony that I'll get into in a minute. That I think this was happening with Jeff Kennett as well too, that they would abuse boys in helicopters. And you say, why would they do this? I think also it's a jurisdiction thing, but they'll add some weird element into the abuse. And especially if you do satanic stuff too, that this will never be believed. But Michael Tarragett, he's actually dead now, but he died a few years ago. But he wrote this book, Meat Rack Boy, and he was one of Ted Heath's victims. There you go.
Right, listen. Ted Heath was of no consequence to me. Absolutely none whatsoever. He was one of thousands, right? There was no sexual penetration. It happened. See, now this, again, shows where the authorities lie and tell lies. I'm under the care of the courts. The authorities have me under their care, under a court order. So, in legal speak, they are acting as my parents, yeah? We agree with that, yeah? Mm-hmm. They state that at the school that I'm talking about where this incident happened, that I was on home leave. Again, the question has to be asked, where was home? Because there ain't no record of it. And bearing in mind that they were my legal guardians, I stayed at the school during the home leave. Right? I'd go to Shirley Oaks or the Hollies, play up. They couldn't handle me. I'd go back to the school and finish holidays there. A guy called Max Sharman, who was the deputy headmaster, said, did I want to go sailing? Yes. I was the only boy there. Nothing else to do. It was either that or do fucking chores, gardening, which I didn't want to do. So we went to a place called Pin Mill, which was then a little yachty haven, nothing. There were no gin palace. They were sailing boats. Probably up to 30, 35 foot at the most. And we went sailing. There was 4 of us. Me, Ted Heath, I didn't know who he was, the doctor from the school, and the fucking deputy headmaster. And I was told to go nude swimming, which I did. Ted Heath dried me. Give me a blowjob, played me with Willie, had me do kissing. Well, he was kissing more than blowing, to be quite honest with you. And got me to do the same to him. And that was the extent of it. I got £5 and a fag. That was the extent of it. And it didn't happen in the open. We went in the cabin on this thing. Just a single cabin.
It's still bad though.
Of course it's bad, but there was nothing I could do.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said no. Although you'd think at 13, 14 years old, you know.
Yeah.
But if you haven't got anybody, right, to back your corner, who the hell do you tell?
Yes.
And you say, why would they do this? I think also it's a jurisdiction thing, but they'll add some weird element into the abuse, and especially if you do satanic stuff too, that this will never be believed. But Michael Tarraga, he's actually dead now, but he died a few years ago, but he wrote this book, Meat Rack Boy, and he was one of Ted Heath's victims. There you go, there's Ted Heath, the mysterious case of pedophile Prime Minister Edward Heath. Now, Ted Heath as well too, he was the Prime Minister that got England into the, whatever it was called then, the European Trade Commission or whatever it was before it was the EU. So he actually was the one that led the people into the EU. David Scherter. Now, I've spoken about this guy before. This ties into this original case, this one I had at the start here, the Johnny Gosch story. And this will actually, I'll show it here. The Franklin, will come back to David Scherter, the Franklin cover-up, child abuse, Satanism and murder in Nebraska. Now, this also leads into the Cathy O'Brien book. Actually, maybe I'll go back to this one in a minute, but the Cathy O'Brien book, she speaks about the drug running and child trafficking being run through the country music industry. And in this book, the Franklin cover-up by John W. DeCamp, now this guy was a state senator, and he eventually uncovered that there was this abuse ring, and the money was being funneled to the Franklin Credit Union. The guy's name was Larry E. King, or Lawrence E. King, and he was considered one of the most powerful black men in America at the time, and probably the most powerful black man in America at the time. So what he was doing is they used to run these child homes, or they were called Boys Town. They had Boys Town in Australia too. And they would get the kids out of Boys Town, and these kids were being not shipped, but they were being flown all over the country into places like Las Vegas and even into Washington and the White House. It came out with, there was one of the victims called Paul Benocchi. You can still watch his videos online today. And their police interviews, and he was not seen as a credible witness because he had multiple personality disorder, which they now call dissociative identity disorder, which is a very common thing for kids that have been through this type of abuse. But he describes being abused by George Bush Sr. Anyway, Larry King never went away for child abuse, but he did go away for it was like money laundering or something through the Franklin Credit Union. And this actually ties into like what they did in Australia with the bottom of the harbour scheme, which what's his name, Malcolm Turnbull, I think was on the board of Macquarie Investment, and they used like some of these small credit unions or building societies back then and banks. This is where all the money funneling goes from. It even came out within the Child Abuse Royal Commission in 2015 that Westpac was on the redress scheme in Australia for child abuse and laundering child abuse material. This was the original one by Bryce Taylor. This came out before Cathy O'Brien's book. But the other one is like what Cathy said about Nebraska. Nebraska was like, I guess bus travel and stuff like that was still bigger in the, in the 60s and the 70s and even prior to that, and rail travel, that Nebraska and Omaha, Nebraska was considered like the middle point. So this is where a lot of different freight and stuff and cargo had to change hands or whatever it might be, and in particular like drug running and child trafficking. So Nebraska was a massive hub for this. And this led to, this is exactly, David Scherter was a victim of this ring, and you can read his book here too. He did a lot of interviews with Fiona Barnett back in the day. But this led to this story, the Johnny Gosch, who took Johnny Gosch. And people that don't know the Johnny Gosch story, he was another kid. He was on a paper route doing his paper deliveries in Omaha, Nebraska, and was taken. And anyway, photos have been got released after of a boy tied up, and they said, that's Johnny. And he was said to have been taken into this underground child abuse and sex trafficking ring. But this boy was never found. Apparently he turned up to his mother's house several years later alive, and he said, "Mum, like, I'm okay." He just wanted to let her know that he's okay. And then this guy apparently started popping up under different aliases over time, all with J and G. His name is Johnny Gosch, J and G as his last name. So he came up as like Jeff Gannon and then other different ones. He was a male porn star, homosexual porn star. And then he turned up in the press gallery under the George Bush administration, and he had ties with the military and George Bush. So this kid was actually recruited who knows what's happened to him, but like likely drugged up and stuff like that. And he was used as an asset for later dates. So that's a lot to consider when you're looking at what's happening with Erica Kirk's story at the moment. So anyway, it's a whole big story about that.
First boy ever to be placed on a milk carton 10 years ago is still missing. His name is Johnny Gosch. He was last seen on his Sunday morning paper route in September of 1982. For his parents, it has been 10 years filled with anguish, frustration, and tears. For police and the FBI, it has meant hundreds of interviews and thousands of man-hours. The result? No leads, no arrests, not even any suspects. Now a convicted sex abuser has come forward to say he was there the day Johnny was kidnapped, and that he has in fact seen him since. Johnny's mother believes him, but the police won't even talk to him. In a moment, we will. But first, let's meet Johnny's mother, Noreen Gosch, and the investigator who is helping her, Roy Stevens. Please welcome them. How have these last 10 years been for you and your family?
They have been so stressful. It's very difficult to even describe to someone who's not been through it. You have, first of all, the tearing pain of being separated from your child, wondering if they're dead or alive or who's doing what to them. You have the work that you encounter trying to locate them, trying to find them, some shred of information that might help. It's just a level of frustration and pain that I never thought I would live through or experience in my entire life.
There must be days when you almost wish that his body had turned up so that the ordeal would be over.
In the kindest way, if Johnny could not be found and have a decent life, I would rather him be at peace, yes. And that's very difficult for me to say publicly, but it's true.
Well, the guilt associated with that feeling even.
Yes. And even the guilt associated with perhaps having food to eat, a bed to sleep in when he might not even have those basic human comforts. It's a survivor guilt that you go through as well.
When was the last time you saw him?
The last time I saw Johnny was the night of the Last Supper, I call it. Both of my other children were home, which was unusual to have everybody there at one time. My daughter's fiance was there, and we had a very nice dinner. Kids were joking around, they were having a great time. And Johnny said, I have to get ready to go to bed because I want to do my paper out in the morning early so we can go to the lake. And he was going to get to take his best friend. So he said goodnight to everyone, gave me a kiss, and went upstairs. Pretty soon he came back downstairs. He came around in the kitchen, put his arms around me, and he gave me an extra kiss on the cheek, and he says, Mom, I really love you. You're the best. And he turned the corner and went up the stairs, and I never saw him again.
Child abuse, Satanism, murder in Nebraska. That's a good one. This was the one that really changed everything for me. Now, I've read 2 of her books. She's got several, but this was the original one. Now, this was actually became a court hearing later, which she eventually put into a second book, Access Denied for Reasons of National Security. And the reason she named the book after that was this information from this book turned into a court case in which the court case and the filings were put under national security. And it's because of not just the abuse that was going on in here, but it was the type of abuse and the program that she was connected to. So her father was producing child porn, and then was actually approached. I think she says, well, it was Gerald Ford at the time before he was president, and they basically came to her with an agreement that they would sell their daughter into this MK Ultra program. And she was picked up and she was put into a specific program in which she was made a presidential model. And what she was as a presidential model, you got to picture this in like how a lot of this fucking stuff works too, especially with like certain media personalities and also with Hollywood. Because you got to remember that a Hollywood person is a perfect dissociative asset, because like when you get the stardom of a Hollywood celebrity, you're invited to state dinners. You're doing filming stuff in locations and places that a lot of people can't get access to. You're meeting dignitaries. You're meeting state leaders, all these types of people around the world, right, going to these different events. And you can be used as a perfect asset as a spy, and particularly as a sex, through sex. And this is what Anneke Lucas and stuff has spoke about, that she was going to be used. If she didn't get out of the cult that she was in, she was going to become like a famous singer. And this is what they do. And there was another lady who worked for News of the World. I can't remember her, Christine. I can't remember now. Anyway, but she's done a lot of interviews, and she was used as a dissociative asset, and she was sent into like the top ups in the IRA. But she was actually working as a journalist at the time, and they would send her in, and she was having affairs with these high-level people in the IRA, and then coming back and handing over the information. So Cathy O'Brien speaks about this, like she was called a presidential model, and so she was a sex slave, but she was considered a high commodity, and because of her ability to dissociate, so she could be given different triggers and codes and stuff, and go and then hand over certain information. She had a photographic memory, so they could give her a document. You got to think, if you're like in military intelligence and you want to send, you don't want to have a paper trail. This is what, like, we're looking at all the Epstein files and stuff. This was back in the 70s that they were using her for this. So there's no paper trail. She was sending information and codes, photographic memory of documents and stuff, and then she would hand over the information. And all they would have to do is access that part of her brain that alter lived in. And this is what what's his name, Joseph Mengele, who was called Dr. Green, who was being used in the underground bases in America that was brought over after World War II. This is what he was doing, and he was doing a lot of dissociation techniques with like color codes, names. So you might say, like, you find out that child's greatest fear is having a dog tortured in front of them or murdered. So then you would open up that compartment of the brain, and when that would happen, you would insert a personality or a program associated with that abuse. And this is what happened with Tim Roy as well too, that he had like 8 different altered personalities. And Tim Roy was a guy who was ritually abused by people like Alan Jones. Who else does he name? John Laws. And I read his book, Big Tim, Little Tim. And to think that this story was bullshit, like you would think that it's bullshit. I met someone whose cousin they had over dinner was going out with the daughter of Tim Roy and confirmed this. And the reason they confirmed this, they actually gave the book to this lady. And that's actually where I first read Tim Roy's book. I'd seen his interviews prior to that. But anyway, he had dissociation and again was in the military. So he would have like a dissociative personality for like shame, one for like guilt or whatever it might be. But what they can do with these programmers is they can trigger that emotion within you, then insert a program or a personality that will come out. And this is why people with trauma-based mind control or dissociation or whatever, when a certain topic might come up, that's when they might go into a programmed alter. And I've seen this happen firsthand with someone. Actually, I was watching Da Vinci Code, and there's a lot of satanic themes in that. And I was with someone then that actually switched while watching the Da Vinci Code because of this alter. And I know that that person has actually been through severe abuse. So yeah, like, look, I think that's, and look, she speaks a lot about Clinton in here. She speaks a lot about the drug running, the CIA, Iran-Contra deal, how Bill Clinton was picking up, was the governor of Arkansas, and they chose Arkansas because they were running all the money, all the dirty money through the savings and loan scandal of that became the Whitewater Papers. And the Whitewater Papers were eventually moved over to the Oklahoma City, the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City. And that became the Oklahoma City bombing when they started looking into Whitewater. And actually the guy, what's his name? What's his name? Oh, sorry. The guy who was the money manager and the money launderer, Stephen Halper, he is actually the guy that set up the Russian dossier. So this is how like all this shit kind of ties together.
Mind control has advanced to the point where they know the ins and outs of the brain and the mind so well that they know how to program not only the subconscious, but to go into the primitive mind, the very area of our mind where blinking, breathing, and circulatory, heartbeat, all that is regulated. And they could go in there and put death programs in place. In my daughter's case, it was respiratory failure, so that in the event that she ever had cause to remember, which they never expected could happen, but in espionage, that can happen. We've heard of that, where the brainwashed, where they have the memory access. So they wouldn't have to take the old cyanide pill anymore like they used to, like spies used to. Instead, they would just simply go into respiratory failure, circulatory failure, and no information would be released at all. There was no chance of the information getting out that way. Since my daughter was being raised was genetically and mind controlled, being brought up to be in espionage, she had that program in place and it went into effect. Because of the medical attention that she needed, she became quickly thrust into the illegal and immoral custody of the state of Tennessee, where she remains today. The violations of laws and rights that proliferated in her so-called legal case were extensive. We had one clean district attorney that went in and told the judge that he was violating constitutional rights and human rights in my daughter's case, and cited law after law after law, and the judge interrupted him and said, but laws do not apply in this case for reasons of national security. This certainly raises the question, what does national security have to do with a documented, validated, and proven rape and molestation of a child's mind and body? For Kelly's sake, and the sake of so many other mind control survivors out there, we need to lift this veil of national security. We need to repeal the 1947 National Security Act. This is the national security that's threatening the security of our nation when it covers up its crimes against humanity, its mind control, when it covers up the CIA's so-called war on drugs.
when it covers up the selling out of our country.
But remember this, because people go, oh, the Epstein files and the revelations and stuff like that. Look, a lot of them are like different memos and stuff. There's not really a lot of hard evidence. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered and people that need to be brought in for questioning and eventually charged. But like the best, like the 2016 WikiLeaks stuff that I don't know if people remember. This is why Trump won. This came out in October 2016, about a month before the election. And Clinton was already becoming very unpopular with some of the stuff that was coming out about her. But then we got the WikiLeaks stuff, which became known as Pizzagate. Only part of it, right? But this came out in 2016. Now, the story behind this was it was the hacked DNC was hacked by Seffridge, who was a disgruntled DNC member who was actually for Bernie Sanders, and he found out that they rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders. And so he's handed over this information to Julian Assange, and he copped a bullet in the head in New York for it, supposedly. But this is one of the best ones you'll find in there. So this is from Huma Abedin. And Huma Abedin now is actually going out with George Soros' son. Would you believe it? the woman that was married to Anthony Weiner, and we got the whole Weiner laptop. And, he actually went to jail for having sex with minors. And this is Huma Abedin that's connected with the Muslim Brotherhood and the communist infiltration of America. That's a whole other story. I'm going to do a video on that. But this is the best one. It says, with fingers crossed, the old rabbit's foot out of the box in the attic, I will be sacrificing a chicken in the backyard tomorrow. This is from Hillary Clinton. And now they're talking about jerky in the new Epstein documents. Jerky. They were suggesting it's cannibalism. All right, the Panama Papers. Now, I don't know if people remember this. I just want to point out that Malcolm Turnbull is a fucking... This guy has been an intelligence agent from the start. Now, people that don't know, he was like a very successful lawyer at the time and a banker. He came in as prime minister as a billionaire already. But do you remember that it came up through the Panama Papers? And this was around the same time. So this was 2016 as well, too. I think he was prime minister at the time. And what happens when the Soviet Union fell, you had a mass raid of former Soviet Union assets, commodities, minerals, all the rest of it. And apparently they were going in and picking up these minerals and the rest of it with pennies on the dollar. And what they said, that like some of these mines and stuff were just left abandoned because of the price of the ruble and oil prices and all the rest of it, that it wasn't even worth their while to go pick them up. And this is what they did. They're like people like Turnbull and that went in and cleaned up. And he eventually became Kerry Packer's lawyer. Australia ceased multi-million-dollar donation controversial Clinton family charities. We all know about the biggest donation that came actually under Gillard government. There's another Australian connection with Alexander Downer. And again, so this is how this ties to George Papadopoulos. So Downer was working as a foreign agent to set up Trump. Now, remember where this dossier first came from, and George Papadopoulos, the fake, what was it, the whole PP scandal, which was the memo that was sent to the judge that opened up the FISA warrant to go and get Trump. That all was concocted from this original guy. What was his name again? Not Stephen Halper, but Stephen Halper was one of the guys that set up. This was the guy that was connected. This goes all the way back to Omaha, Nebraska, the Clintons, and the rest of it, right? You see, the whole thing's tied. Here's the one with Turnbull. Playboy magazine brought to Australia by Malcolm Turnbull. And this is like, anyone that knows about Playboy knows that there was a C-funded CIA one. This is one I want to bring attention to. People really need to go listen to Glenn. And you know where everyone keeps bringing up the 28 pedophile, like this one document, right? The obsession with that one document. And I think it's a good thing that people are obsessed with it, because it's one of the most clear-cut things we've got, thanks to Heffernan for bringing it up. But everyone's been saying it's, including myself, is that it's Keating on there. Not that it really matters, like they're both implicated, but Glenn talks a lot about the boys' home in King's Cross. He talks about the wall, which many others have spoken about. in which the boys were literally prostituted off to some of the most wealthiest, famous people in Sydney. But he speaks about this guy, Simon Davies, who was running this kids centre, and I can't remember the lady's name, but then Bob Hawke and others were on the board, right? And Bob Hawke's been mentioned by many others too. But like, yeah, go watch Glenn's videos. He's putting out so much stuff, and obviously this is his book, Predator's Paradise. I haven't read it, but I'm going to.
Bob Hawke was a good Prime Minister. That's too surprising. You know, the man that I put in prison, Grant Morris, he was a good accountant too. I fail to see a point. Being good at one thing doesn't mean that you're exempt from being bad at another. Just wanted to put that out there. I hear your point. He may well have been a good Prime Minister, but he wasn't a good person who, you know, he knew and did nothing. And to know and do nothing is as bad as to do, from my perspective. I honestly, in my heart, mean this when I say it. I have more anger and hurt towards those that knew and didn't do anything than those that actually did what they did. See, the ones that did what they did, I can put into a box. I can categorise that. But as a father, as a grandfather, I can't for the life of me grasp it. You know, there's a woman also, her name was Annette Crowe, who was the working at the refuge. She's a woman, right? I don't get that. She was taking children to the Cross refuge knowing what they were doing, yet for some reason, because she gave evidence to the Woods Royal Commission, she's somewhat exempt from her behaviour. Like, that doesn't make sense. It's like me going out and doing 10 stick-ups with 10 different guys, and then I go and drop all 10 of them, and they let me go free. I still did the stick-ups, right? I'm still a good dad, but I did armed robberies. Like, you know what I'm saying? One doesn't exempt you from the other. I understand your perspective, but please hear mine. It was high-profile men coming to King's Cross and buying children. It was like going to a coffee shop and buying a cup of coffee, you know. They'd just come down and be able to purchase a kid. I went from this bubbly little boy to silent, literally silent. I was so afraid of getting backhanded, hit, slapped, punched, or sexually abused that I just ceased being a person. I was just like this little shadow. You'd see little boys sitting in there and all these different men, and people I used to see come to there, and the war, specifically the war, was some people that would blow your mind. You know, some of the most powerful people in our country. I'm talking about teachers, principals, lawyers, politicians. I saw him and just this anger came over me. I thought, I'm going to say something to this guy. And I walked up and I said, one day, I'm going to tell the world what you did. And I just kept thinking, they're never going to get him. They're never going to get him. So what we want you to do is wear a wire. And I was like, are you kidding me? I'm not wearing a wire. But I did. I remember walking out that station and thought, no one's going to ever hurt me again. That's it. It's over. No person will ever touch me, control me, or hurt me again. Little did I know, I was literally walking into a predator's paradise. The place was littered with them.
But we're going to get into the Michelson testimony. Oh, first of all, before that, there's another one, and obviously the Wood Royal Commission that those documents, that document came from. Here's a guy called Dean Henry, and this is part of his police statement, and he's talking about Justice Woods. Justice Woods was the guy that was running the Wood Royal Commission, right? And I think he actually works for WADA now, the World Anti-Doping Authority. So this is Dean Henry, a guy that's absolutely scrambled. He also said that he has met the Queen. He's named many high-profile people that he was abused by, and this guy's so scrambled in the one interview that I've heard of him. It's very, very hard to listen to. But this is what I'm saying. Like when people go, "Oh, this is conspiracy and stuff," this is a fucking police statement by Dean Henry, right? You mentioned a couple of other names as well. Woodham. Okay, so Woodham, before we get to James Woods, Woodham was the head of corrections in Sydney, and he only died a couple of years ago. I think his eulogy was done by Ray Hadley, right? So he said the head of corrections was a pedophile. And the reason he brought up Woodham was at the time, Dean Henry was in jail when he gave this statement. So he was in jail, and the head of the corrections of that jail was a pedophile that had abused him. So he said, you mentioned a couple of other names as well, Woodham. Yeah, Justice Woods and Justice Collins. So they were your abusers. Yes, were abusers. Yes. Now, Dean's got a lot of issues and stuff. That's kind of how he talks. Mr. Latimore. So they used you, go out of your house or something and you'd get taken there. There was a room at the back of Porky's
Porky's was a strip club in King's Cross back in the day, like a sort of little rooms, and that's where it all went down. Now, I think like Porky's even had ties in with the Trimbolis and stuff. There was like Italian mafia back in the day, the Underbelly series. He goes on here, and it all started with me when I was 5. When I turned the age of 5, my uncle Alan and my mum tried to rape me. At that age of 5, penetrated me, tried to cut my dick off. It was crazy. Miss Kasoma, this was your home. Mr. Henry, this was at my home, yes. My mum used to sell me to people. Like virtually, I was like, you got Ron Woodham, guy I just said before, head of corrections, Justice Woods, Justice Collins, Louis Bayer, and what's his name? Sam Abraham. He used to run the cross. Right. So this is what I mean. These are proper fucking testimonies.
About Porky's nightclub. What was it?
It was a strip club.
Yep.
Where women and men would go there, enjoy themselves, but downstairs in the underground areas, there was a place where they called the kids nightclub, where if you had money, you could pay for a child for the night.
Tell us about that. How many times were you taken there, or from what years?
I was taken there. I can say this. I was taken there from the age of 5 right till I was 14.
Yeah, righto.
And the thing is, I can never change what's happened to me. But
yeah.
But
we can expose the mongrels, can't we?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So tell me about some of the other names that were involved in all this rubbish.
You got Bob Hawke, Murdoch, Justice Woods, Justice Collins, Pearl, Packer, King, and the big one is Kidman. Kidman was the worst out of them all. Nicole Kidman's father was one out of them all. Believe me, I tell you that.
Anthony Kidman.
Yeah.
An interesting term, 12 tribes, that I've not heard of personally before.
What it is 12 people that are syndicate of the Blackwood, the Knighthood, and they had the final say of where you go and what happens to you. Like there's children getting killed. There's all sorts of things that happen there, as you know yourself, and not good.
So you're saying that you witnessed ritual abuse as well and experienced that?
Oh yeah. Quite a few times.
So is there anything you can tell us about that?
It was disgusting and it was horrible to watch. Royal Commissioner statement, I was bashed and I was put in hospital.
Yeah, right. So it was. So you had a genuine reason to be concerned, didn't you?
Yeah, it's right, because when you say one of the ex governors, the commissioner of the correct services is a pedophile, they don't really like you to talk about something like that.
And that's Ron Woodham, yeah?
Yeah, it's correct.
So you're saying that Ron Woodham, who was a commissioner of corrective services in New South Wales,
yep,
was a pedophile.
That's correct.
I've got the book, Little Tim, Big Tim. That is, evidential reference. I feel no problems there. I've got the statement from the police. They actually believe me. Like I was bounced from the Royal Commission to the police. Spent 4 days over 2 years telling the story about VIPs.
They actually gave it to me. They're like, "Oh, Dale, you know that all this shit you've been telling me for years. I actually met." She's like, "I met his daughter." She read the book and gave it to me. And Tim Rowe talks in the opening scene of that book where his father was a Freemason. And so got in with people like Alan Jones, because his father actually worked at Derek Boy's home with Gordon Moyes, who's a Christian Democrat guy who was another pedophile who used to go on 2GB, of which Alan Jones used to worked for. And Tim Roy names 3 people on the 2GB as pedophiles, was Lord Singleton and Jones.
But it was at the hands of your parents, though, wasn't it?
Originally was my father. Yeah, my father was sort of a mule for some sort of pedophile ring at the time, and that sort of was pretty strong up to about the age of 10.
So he would deliver you to the pedophile ring?
Yeah, unfortunately. From +1, you got Singleton, Laws +2, Jones +3, Moyes +4, Clemson +5. There are the 5 names there that he was blackmailing my father for $1 million each. My old man worked with, I believe, Gordon Moyes and him worked together as guards. And in that role, they were VIP procurers.
Oh, procurers.
Yeah. Okay, so within his social club, which was the Freemasons, he decided that he was engaged by the Freemasons to run around and bring children in for rituals.
So this is a bit of an overview of it. It says Dean Henry was given the evidence, it was in 2014, in a private session to the Australian 2014 Royal Commission into the institutional responses to child sexual abuse. Now, does people remember too when Scott Morrison came out and apologised for the crime, and he said the crimes of ritual abuse? Doesn't just say sexual, he says the crimes of sexual ritual abuse, I think he says.
The crimes of ritual sexual abuse happened in schools, churches, crimes of ritual sexual abuse, crimes of ritual sexual abuse.
So it's on the record by the Prime Minister. Dean named Justin Woods as an abuser. This is a special significance because Justice Woods had been in charge of the Royal Commission into the police in the 1990s, which covered up some of the investigations of pedophilia. What better way to fucking run a child abuse Royal Commission? Well, it wasn't specifically a child abuse Royal Commission, it was into police corruption. But what a way to cover up child abuse than having the person who's running the Royal Commission involved in the pedophilia. Like modus operandi, that's how it's done. Original author stated that this is how the pedophilic cabal system works: get pedophiles into power so that they can be controlled. The following is a transcript of DNA. Okay. And what's the other one? Justice Yeldon, who actually ended up topping himself, and he was named by all these kids. What's his name? Glenn speaks a lot about that. But here we go. This was the one. Survivor alleged elite pedophile ring, including former Prime Minister, speaks out. That's a Fiona Barnett one. And she speaks about this guy, John Gittinger, right? Now, the reason I put him in here, so he was part of, I believe he was part of this Operation Matchbox at the time. And Matchbox was basically the Operation Paperclip equivalent in Australia. And these were like some of these people that were brought out from Europe, especially if you're watching like Candace's series at the moment, you'll know like especially like all the social sciences and psychology, massive. So getting to develop the personality assessment system, the PAS, in 1958, Helen joined him under a grant at Columbia College School of Physicians and Surgeons. Okay, so that was John Gittinger. Now, he worked also over in America and Washington in specific with this guy, Anthony Kidman, who is Nicole Kidman's father. Now, he was Sydney University. He also worked in Hawaii, or mostly worked in Hawaii, but he worked over in Washington. And he was like a protege of this Gittinger. And Fiona Barnett speaks all about John Gittinger, who was one of her abusers. So these are, I won't go all through these, but these are like the ones to look up, which is like Steve McMurray, MK Ultra in Australia. I think he mentions Gittinger here. CIA's Human Ecology Fund gave research to Professor Ronald Taft of the University of Western Australia in 1961, studies of the relationship between health and personality environment factors in groups. So you can get, these are like big write-ups that Stephen Murray's done. He used to put out like so much stuff back then. It's 2015. Honestly, I've not heard from him since. I'm trying to think, where's the one with Anthony Kidman? Oh, here we go. Okay, psychology students in Sydney during Orr's visit, which later go on to perform Manchurian candidate hypnosis experiments, is what Candace is speaking about at the moment, with the network of researchers of Pennsylvania. Perry went on to become a board member of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. Now, people know about that. That was set up by like pedophiles to, as people started to come forward, that they would put them with this false memory syndrome. Dr. Anthony Kidman, also studying psychology at Sydney University during the experiment and leadership, would go on to study the University of Pennsylvania under Tim Beck. Now, with Kidman as well too. If we go back to this guy, Dean Henry, in his statement, he names Anthony Kidman in here as well too, and he says of all these abusers, how bad all of them were, Anthony Kidman was by far the worst. He said he was the worst. Here we go. Anthony Kidman dies, child abuse allegations. Now, he died in Singapore, and this was within months of these big revelations coming out. He's announced that he's dead. There's Justice Woods, the Wood Royal Commission, accused of child abuse by Dean Henry. There's Paul Keating. And do you remember, this is why I think this whole thing's set up? Like, they must have so much surveillance and evidence on Epstein, and they showed that Edward Barack, it was originally Prince Andrew, then Ehud Barak, and then they showed this woman, and it was like days. Who's the mystery woman coming out of Epstein's apartment? This was a big thing, I think, like 2018. It might have been 2019. It was around the time of the second Epstein arrest, and they focusing on this woman. And I'm telling you that they know there's going to be links here with Paul Keating. They didn't make that wasn't put forward for no reason. I just want to mention this one too. Now, this was put in as an appendix at the end of one of David Icke's books. Actually, it was, I think it was on Human Race, Get Off Your Knees, that book, which I think that came out around 2010, and it's called Confessions of a Satanist. Now, it's a really interesting document. We can't put validity to it because we don't know who the person is. It just says by Frata 616, right? And this was published on Sunday, the 17th of January, 2010. Okay, yes, it was around that time. It's the line, Human Race, Get Off Your Knees book. Now, the reason I put this in here too, and this was written as a deathbed confession, and they do this too. The good example of this is like the Blue and the Red book by the ghostwriter that wrote the Billy Shears memoirs, the memoirs of Billy Shears, which is about the Paul McCartney story too. And they give you a lot of how they operate. And this is what this guy has done. He's told you about how the global system of Satanism works. And he says that Australia and Sydney in particular is the capital of worldwide Satanism, the head of worldwide Satanism. You can read that. That's kind of like the introductory paragraph. It said Satanism flourishes beneath the scintillating midnight blue, wet streets and bewildering phosphorus lights, Australia's glittering capital cities. Its practitioners are from all walks of life, all marginal types, and those predisposing personalities have always been a part, will always be important to Satanism and its leaders. They are merely tools. The Antominian influence is now so pervasive and is not readily noticed. Amongst its echelons, some are politicians, medical doctors, high-ranking police officers, lawyers, advertising gurus, decorated military men, media personalities, fashion models, social workers. Amongst the lowest are temporary rank prostitutes, minor drug dealers, and a number of high school students. Some operate in the mist. Their victims are drip-fed straight amnesia by an assortment of mind control measures. Okay, you get the whole point. But that we got one of these too from what was his name? Not John Wayne Casey. It was the other serial killer in New York. I think it was John Wayne Casey. Yeah, it was like in the 90s, and he put out this whole thing saying, yeah, I was killing them, but I was actually doing it as part of a satanic cult. Now, this is the one I want to get onto with the Raina Michelson testimony, and this is from a mainstream media article. Victoria's Ombudsman is now investigating an alleged mishandling of child sexual abuse cases and claims of police involvement cases dating back to 1992. Sexual abuse psychologist Raina Michelson brought the claims to attention of the Chief Commissioner Christina Nixon in 2002. Now, she goes through this in her testimony, and the people that were set up around her, very much like what we're seeing now with Candace and TPUSA, like what that operation is, that every single person that was put in on her board was part of the cover-up, right? And she was trying to get to Christina Nixon at the time to report basically like that she was being stonewalled by these police, and the police were covering up a child abuse ring. And Christina Nixon, according to her report, really wanted to know about this, and they wouldn't let it get to her. She ended up ringing to report some of the police investigating, she went to report them to like an independent body, and it got reported straight back to them. And then, there was a lot of stuff. They were threatening her life. They tampered with her car. She was desperately being stalked. But this is an official mainstream media report. You got to remember this. So claims her attention of Chief Commissioner Christine Nixon in 2002. Now remember, Nixon actually got stood down after the bushfires. I kind of think the more I look back that Nixon wasn't too bad. Dr. Michelson says that several of the victims she represents claim they were sexually abused by people wearing police uniforms and what turned out to be on police premises. Now, this ties into the bit that there were police actually raping children down in the Mornington Peninsula at one of the childcare centres there too. She says video implicating police was handed over to detective by allegation, but investigations were tampered. The police denied that they received the tape and there is nothing further that could be done, she said. Police also say allegations which are yet to be sustained have also been made against the prominent members of the media. This was the fucking because what she actually found when she set up this child abuse ring. Now, going back to the very start of it, I don't want to go through the whole thing because you can read her testimony online. She was running this program, and they would basically go into schools and say, teach them about child safety and how to spot a pedophile and these kind of things in the process of what you do. And she received these anonymous letters by some of the kids. What do you do if your teacher's the one abusing you? Another one said, what do you do if they're abusing you and you'd like it? And the other one said, she was actually eventually approached by one of these kids and said, what about if you're being abused? And they said, well, you need to go and report it to the school, whoever the fuck it is, like the school counselor. And they said, what about if they won't believe you? Now, this opens up a whole can of worms. She was getting sabotaged at the school. But how this became really real for me, this is the first school I ever worked at. And I didn't know at the time because I hadn't read this testimony at the time. But when I was working there, it was like hush, hush. And I found out through teachers that worked there since that this was true. There is a massive pedophile ring and satanic cult being run, and the town is Rushworth. And anyway, interesting, another gold town. But so yeah, and she found it was massive what was going on there. And she was talking about the police would come in and they would stonewall the kids and try and tell them they were wrong in the interview, breaking all these protocols and stuff like that. But that was the initial bit. And then she ended up, she was approached by people that were on the board of Channel 10, which is one of the big news media networks in Australia. She ended up doing mainstream media interviews with people like Bert Newton. She talks about her experiences with people like him, and then saying that Jeff Kennett was actually connected in with this ring. Then she even finds out that Channel 10 is producing child porn. And this goes back to what Rachel Vaughan has said, that she was used in child porn. I think it was, I don't want to get it wrong, but I think it was Channel 9 in Adelaide, and she was abused by someone in a Humphrey Bear thing. Now, when these things start to correlate, because Raina Michelson said she saw something in Channel 10 too, and it was the same thing, that they were dressing up in these costumes and stuff. And Raina actually got onto the back server of Channel 10, and there was certain codes. It basically taps into the dark web through the Channel 10 servers, and the whole thing fucking shut down. And then there ended up being a big fire on the premises at the time. You can find the article to that too. So, but what happened was, the people that ended up becoming on the board of her charity were all connected in with this news network. Here's another article on it, 2004, Victorian police in pedophile ring. Highly organized. Now, I'll try and put these articles in the links below if people want to read them. Now, we know Bert Newton. She talks about Bert Newton. We know about him when he said he made that joke about Graham Kennedy and nurturing children, and both of them have been accused pedophiles. A highly organized pedophile ring involving Victoria Police and former politicians had been operating in the state since the 1970s. Anti-child abuse group claims today. So this is all legit. It's not some fucking made up story. These were mainstream media. Now you got to remember, by the time that this gets published in the mainstream media, they had to. They will never put that out unless it's become so big that they've had to put this out. Dr. Raina Michelson of the Child Sexual Abuse Prevention Program and Braveheart's founder, Hetty Johnson, today said that they had been told by the child sex abuse victims that former Victorian elected politicians and police members were involved in child pornography and prostitution. She's referring to Jeff Kennett in particular here too. A review of the handling of child abuse and raised questions with the ability of some officers assigned to these crimes, writes Gary Hughes. The attitudes of Victoria Police toward child sexual abuse and the willingness to prejudge their credibility were among a range of disturbing criticisms of Victoria Police sexual abuse crimes and officers contained by the Ombudsman report today. Now, this is what would happen because, like, some of these kids would come, Raina and others would encourage them to come and make a statement, and they'd come in and the police would be like, so are you telling the truth? Like, that they'd stand over them. And one of the cases, they had a support person in there, someone from the school, and they said that wasn't an interview, that was an interrogation, or that was like a shutdown attempt. And they were both aware of what was going on. So this is what they're showing here. The police, when you're running a massive child abuse ring, you need the top levels involved. You need the ombudsman. You need especially like CASA, which is a child sexual abuse unit within the police. You have to have certain central figures within there involved. You also have the hierarchical structure of police where it goes up, it goes up, it goes up. You do all your work on the ground and then it gets stalled. In this case, they had people in the education department that had lost the documents, right? The teacher that was abusing kids got moved on to another school like they used to do with the old parish priests. So anyway, massive story. Okay, so this is about the Matchbox program into Australia. Here's more of the same thing, just to prove it. Children haunted for more than a decade, new probe into abuse claims. I think that's Simon Overland. He became the new police commissioner. And this is another one, police reopen case. And what you found, so Raina, I think, is still practicing as a psychologist I think she's in the Northern Territory now. But this is what I mean. It's like the revelations of the Epstein thing is like, we're kind of like clutching at straws. We're getting people like Bill Gates now he's admitting like the next thing, like he fucked these prostitutes. And like, I mean, some of these stories, man, like they said, like Bill Gates fucked these Russian prostitutes, got an STD, and then spiked his own wife's drink. Like, these are the fucking stories. But what I'm saying is we've got real tangible stuff here to Australia, and I think eventually once this stuff is becoming exposed worldwide, that these cases need to be reinvestigated. I'm just going to stop that here. So look, what I think this is an amazing time. We're going to, like I said before, there's a consciousness shift that's taking place, but this is leading. It's leading in the right direction, and what we would expect to see now is something massive that is going to take away from this news story. What happened last time, just before when Epstein killed himself? Right? Was it the end of 2019? That was when all COVID happened. Straight after that. And I think we're on the next verge of that too. And even like a weird one, I don't even want to bring it up, but it's kind of weird. When the first seal was broken, first seal of the apocalypse of COVID in 2020, Tom Hanks was in Australia, and he was one of the first ever reported cases of COVID in Australia. Believe it or not, it was actually Tom Hanks. And then remember, he posted his picture. He was quarantining, and he posted a picture of his Corona typewriter. Anyway, he's back in Australia. Tom Hanks is back in Australia, and they're putting out these weird articles. They're like, who's the incognito man on the train? So they're saying incognito, something's in disguise, right? So, yeah, let it be. What will be, will be. And the revelation of child abuse and where it's now going into, it's not just child abuse, it's going into Satanism and satanic ritual abuse. And I think that is the key here. And I can see that being exploited for other agendas. And I think it will be, because it's eventually going to lead us. This is what's going to lead us onto the religious element. If you think of the eons long game of showing the dark and bringing to the light, that we need to have a non-scrambled period of when this information becomes so devastating that we're not drawn to something that's appearing as love on the other side. We have to have like a processing period. And I think this is why we have the leg up that a lot of us that have been aware of the reality of this situation for a long time too, that we're not going to be swung over to that other side. But ultimately, this stuff coming into the light is a good thing. And what I feel for the most is firstly, all the victims of this thing, And then I always just think to people like Rachel, and having to put out this information when it wasn't popular for so long, and doing the fight behind the scenes for someone like her, and also many others that have done it silently and haven't known what to do. So anyone that's been a victim of that, and whether you fought for it publicly or privately, like, you deserve your day. First of all, justice. What happened to you and what you had to witness, and those that aren't here to see that justice. I think that's the first thing. That's the first reason why it needs to stop. And secondly is for the wider public to become aware of this and the implications of that. And also, I think most importantly that this doesn't continue to happen. And I think the energy that's actually maintained this is a victimhood to a large degree, but also there's been a collective looking away. And I've been listening to a lot of David Wilcock lately too, and he speaks about the importance of, what's the word? What does he say? The importance of service to others. So it's not just about yourself. There's wider implications for this, and obviously the impact of this being put into the light, we have to lose that victimhood too. So I can say it's going to be huge, man. It's going to be happening for the rest of our life. But like, what are we going to do when, especially when revelations, like some of the serious revelations, like if you look at the abuse and stuff that Cathy O'Brien writes about in her book, especially around like Hillary Clinton and George Bush Sr., she speaks about the worst thing was not only her abuse, but then they actually got her child Callie into it, and she spoke about the brutality. And I think, like, I mean, we don't need to hear the details of sexual abuse, but I think, like, you do need to understand of, like, at least put yourself in the mindset of like, how the fuck could anyone deal with that? And also to see what the most evil of evil is. So I won't explain, like, the type of abuse that he subjected Callie to, but she said that the worst thing was watching Callie after she'd been raped by George Bush, and apparently he was brutal. And she said that she would run like 100-degree temperatures after it. She would be so uncomfortable. Her ass would be bleeding from the rape, and she could do nothing to comfort her. And this was actually used as a mind control technique of deep, severe torture on not just Callie, but Cathy, because she was held captive that she could not help her own daughter. And that's a level of control and power, even more so than her own abuse, was the level of torture of not being able to help her own daughter. And this is what David Icke explained there's actually, I should put it under here. He does a 2-hour exposure on the Westminster pedophile ring. But the way he explains it within MK Ultra is they will break you down and they'll find your greatest fear. So in this case of Cathy's was the torture of her child and her having to witness it. They said they will find your greatest fear and they will make you experience it over and over and over again. And not only would they do that, and they're doing it for scientific purposes as well too, and for what they see as the greater good of their satanic agenda, but they do it for their own sadistic reasons as well too. They get pleasure from that. Now, what the fuck does that say about our reality and what evil is for someone to put someone through that sort of torture and to fucking get off on it? What does that say about their mentality? There is no more evil than that. There is no, I don't think you can find, like, what other form of evil can you have of abusing and torturing a child and subjecting their mother to witness that in front of them and knowing that that's the most painful thing for them and to experience sexual pleasure from their pain? That is, there's no more, I can't think of anything more evil. That is like the most, so that is the most darkest polarity. There's no dark on that. So we know that exists, right? We don't need to go there again. That is what exists. So what's the opposite? What's the opposite of that? Because both of that lives within us. Both of that exists within the duality of what this fucking realm is. So when you come out of the most evil of evil, the other side is waiting. And that is a process that we are collectively going to have to go through. And I just think buckle up. And I think like take it on its stride, and also a pat on the back for people that that have done the work in looking at this, being an advocate for this, and also people that have been through it themselves. Like fucking clap, because it's been hard, but it's going to be really hard for everyone else that has not been consciously aware of this part of reality. But then this opens up a whole bigger questions about what is this world, what is this evil? Because I think this is going to lead to the UAPs. This is what they're saying, that we can't tell you what UFO. This is what they're saying on the inside. Supposedly, we can't tell you what UAPs are because they're spiritual in nature, and there's angelic ones, and there's demonic ones, and we can't subject you to that level of evil. Well, I'm sorry. Once we've seen this child abuse, and this is what I think a lot of this is going to be a disclosure of this information to butter us up for future events. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. And yeah, if people want to, we're going to start doing themed specific podcasts as well too. I do want to have, I've got a number of different guests we want to get on, but that's going to be a consistent thing now too for those who want to join Patreon. We'd love to see in there. I think we've got a few in there at the moment. But yeah, if you want to come in and you don't like it, you can always leave. So yeah, just come and join and become part of the community. And if not, I'll catch us all later. Have a good weekend. Flow like a fountain. This time will be different. I swells like a mountain. Yet still you believe that. Do you wanna live in a body?
No one's going to ever hurt me again. That's it. It's over. No person will ever touch me, control me, or hurt me again.
Or do you wanna breathe free from pain relief? Do you wanna see a world that's yours? Just let the light in. Let the light